I'm going to be talking to Professor Kevin Gurney of the School of Informatics, Computing, and Cyber Systems in Northern Arizona University about an article that he and his co-authors recently had published in the Nature Communications Journal. It's called Underreporting of Greenhouse Gases in U.S. Cities. So welcome to the interview, Kevin.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Why don't we start with an overview of your study, please?
Sure. We used a system that we've built over about 15 years that quantifies fossil fuel carbon dioxide, that is carbon dioxide emitted through the combustion of fossil fuels, all across the United States. We carved out a series of cities within the US and compared our estimates using this system to estimates that the cities have generated themselves, and found fairly stark differences. On average, cities appear to underestimate by about 18 to 19%, but when you look at cities individually, there was very high scatter, with some cities overreporting, more cities underreporting, but as high as 150% underreporting.
Now, why is accurate measurement of greenhouse gases, particularly CO2, why is that important?
I think there's two reasons. One is the sort of global reason that we want to have an accurate idea of the nature of the problem. We don't want to be mistaken as to its severity and its magnitude. The other reason is more policy specific. We want good estimates so that when we're doing something about it, if we're reducing emissions, for example, we can see the effect and we know that we're having an impact on the problem. And the only way we'll be able to do that is to have an accurate assessment of both the beginning amounts before we engage in policy and the amounts after that policy has been operationalized.
A couple of years ago, I interviewed an engineer about methane emissions in the Canadian oil and gas industry. And he made the point, because methane emissions are poorly measured in that sector in both the US and Canada. And he made the point that if you're going to have a carbon pricing system to reduce these kinds of emissions, you can't do that. You can't price it until you can measure it. And I would imagine that as more states move to cap and trade programs, there's even talk of a national carbon pricing coming in under the Biden administration, that then accurate measurement becomes just that much more important.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one way that we think about this is, as you say, we want to lower the risk that investors see when they look at the possibility of investing in, let's say, carbon offsets or carbon reducing activities. I always make the analogy that nobody would buy a stock in the stock market that's valued at $1 plus or minus $10. I mean, nobody would do that. That's a stock that is incoherent in terms of its value. And in the same way, if we want a cap and trade or market-based system to work, which I agree is probably the most likely path for North America, given our history, we're going to have confidence and integrity in the numbers that we use. That's the only way we're going to attract that investment. And we also know that this will require the private sector to be a part of the solution. I don't think it's going to be done any other way. And right now, I think a lot of that investment in offsets and reductions is sitting on the sidelines because they look at the system and they don't see numerical integrity and hence are unwilling to make those investments.
I'm glad you brought up finance, because I think that more and more we're beginning to understand that the financial community investors are really driving a lot of the improved and the focus on greenhouse gas emissions, climate risk, basically. And
Yep.
It would seem to me that accurate measurement of greenhouse gases and climate reporting go hand in hand.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we have to have an accurate system and one with integrity and integrity over time. You know, I think right now what happens is the nation states or cities or states will do an estimation and then wait 5 years and do another one because it's an expensive and tedious thing to do. And I would argue we need a system that's continuous. It's continuously checking in so that if we're off course, we can course correct. Another bit of confidence that I think investors want to see is the ability to have a feedback, an information feedback loop that's rapid and allows you to course correct and make adjustments instead of waiting too long and finding out, oh, all along we were unaware that we were off track, and we've only found it too late.
Last question, Kevin, and that is, as a scientist, do you have high confidence, medium confidence, or low confidence in the conclusions that that came from your model?
I think we have high confidence, and we could have done this study 5 years ago, but we waited because we wanted to ensure that we had lowered the uncertainty, had built enough confidence and integrity in the system that we've built to be able to make the claims that we have. And I think we now, with the type of work that we do building these estimates and using the atmosphere to check them, have very high confidence in our ability to quantify emissions at all scales, all the way down to a city block up to the planet.
And I guess one of the implications of your work is that I would think that's the cities named in your study. I think there were 48 of them. The ones that are, have serious misestimates would be paying close attention to that and use that as the basis for improvements to their reporting.
Yeah, and I think a recommendation that we've been making in other places, and certainly in this paper as well, is that in some ways it's probably not very efficient for cities to be doing these quantifications themselves. That their money and effort could be put to better use on focusing on emissions reductions. And hence we're trying to build a system that, and you could make an analogy, for example, to weather forecasting, which is, I think, a good one. We wouldn't expect every city or locality to collect weather data, run a weather model, and come up with their own forecast. It just wouldn't make sense. It's an inefficient way to solve that problem. We have a centralized system that's a federation around the planet of scientists and engineers that build the weather forecasting system and then give the results out to everybody. And then they can use that however they would like to use it. In the same sense, we think that greenhouse gas emissions quantification probably should be done the same way. We should have a reliable, apolitical system that's, driven by scientific rigor and is built and produces results that can be given to everybody. And then they can use that to reduce their emissions. The one thing they probably know better than we do, which is, what are the constraints within their given city? What are the financial resources they have at their disposal? What is amenable to their citizens? All those types of things that cities and states know better than we do. That's where they should put their time and effort rather than the sort of expensive and rather tedious effort of coming up with these accounts.
Kevin, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.